Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Do You Need a Wellbeing Strategy? My name is Holly Mulvihill-Clark and I'm part of the team here at IRSM. Your speaker today is Workplace and Wellbeing Specialist Lisa Whittleton. Thank you for joining us today, Lisa. Before I hand over, there are just a few housekeeping type things that I need to run through first. So to begin with, you'll be on mute for the duration of the webinar, but please feel free to ask any questions or make any comments using the Q&A function, which you can see to the right-hand side of your screen. We'll keep an eye on these throughout the presentation and then also dedicate 5 to 10 minutes at the end to go through anything else that comes through. If you need any help or guidance using the system, you can click the I symbol, which again is on the right-hand side of your screen, and this will take you through to the support site. And finally, this webinar is being recorded and a copy of the recording will be placed on the IRSM YouTube channel after the event. Okay, that's enough from me. Lisa, I'm just going to make you a presenter now so that you can start sharing your screen with us.
Okay, thank you. Right, I'm hoping that you can see the slides.
Yes, we can.
Fab. Right, okay. So yes, thank you for joining and thank you very much for having me. It's very exciting to be partnering with IRSM to deliver a sort of range of mental wellbeing and resilient support to its members. So the topic today, I think it is a bit of a hot topic. The last 18 months have, undoubtedly made us, I suppose, realise that we can't take our mental health for granted. So we do, it's something that we have to put effort into. We do have to think about what we're doing to look after ourselves because we've had such a challenging time. We've had a lot of uncertainty, a lot of change. There's been the isolation, we could go on, but yes, it's definitely raised awareness of mental health. And from a risk point of view, we're very much aware of the physical risks of COVID, and that's been huge for organisations. But also thinking psychological safety element and the mental health risks. I think that's something that's actually coming more to the forefront for organisations, and a lot of the companies we're working with are starting to incorporate wellbeing into part of their health and safety policies, and really show that commitment to making physical and mental health equal in terms of the priorities for businesses. So as I said, there is more awareness around mental health in societies and workplaces, and this is across the globe, and I appreciate there might be people here that are not in the UK. So although we will be looking at some stats that are kind of more UK based, hopefully this will still be really relevant. And as Holly said, please do put any comments and questions in, because it'd be really useful to hear any specific trends or things that are going on for you. And we will leave some time at the end to discuss those. So before I go into the overview of the day, I'm just going to briefly talk a little bit about what we do. So set up Illuminate in 2013. I'm the founder, and really our passion comes from a combination of personal experiences, people close to me struggling with their mental health, but also professionally supporting individuals who have complex to mild mental health issues. And really, we spend so much time at work. It's something that gives us that routine, that purpose. It's really important for our self-worth. So we believe that, it's vital that the working environment is one that we want to be in and that is right for us, but equally is supportive of us. So we provide a range of services. We look at completing audits with clients, wellbeing strategy development, specialist training in all areas related to mental health and coaching, and also that more reactive support, vocational rehab and occupational health for individuals who may be unwell or may be absent from work and need support to get back on track. So in this session, we're going to be looking at what we mean by wellbeing and how we're doing right now. And I suppose wellbeing is all sorts of things. It includes, our physical health, our mental health, our our financial well-being also comes into that, and those three areas are what are really important for sort of forming the basis of a well-being strategy. So we're going to take a bit of a look at how we're doing. Then the business case for investing in well-being. So what is the return on investment? Why is this so important? And you may well already be on that journey, in which case this is sort of giving you more, I suppose, evidence to keep going, or it might be quite early and you might be genuinely thinking, do we need a wellbeing strategy? We'll look at often what can go wrong, and a lot of this comes from our experiences supporting clients, the kind of things that might go wrong, or the habits that we might fall into, and then what we can do to put those right, how a wellbeing strategy can help, and I'll leave you with a few questions just to reflect on moving forward. We can't sort of have big discussions today, given that it's a webinar, but hopefully that will kind of get you thinking. So actually, I'm just going to come out of this for a moment and hopefully smoothly share this menti.com screen. So what I'd like everybody to do, just to get involved, and this is completely anonymous, is you can either use your mobile phone or open another browser window and go to www.menti.com and type in that 4-digit code 16830721, and it will prompt you to answer this question here. So how do I feel today? And as I said, it is completely anonymous and can be just quite useful in capturing or giving you the opportunity for a start to kind of stop and reflect on how you are. We don't often get the opportunity to do that when we're busy, when we're focusing on so many other priorities. But also just to give you insight into the fact that we're all at very different places, you know, throughout a day, throughout a week, and that's really normal. So we'll just wait for some of these to come in. So we've had one in there, unsettled. Okay, that's not uncommon. Great, brilliant. Engaged. It's a nice start at the beginning of a webinar. I like that. But already with 3, there's a real mix here. Weary. Weary is a good word. We often see a lot of fatigue and tiredness, and you know that was very understandable from, I mean, we were tired before the pandemic, a lot of us. You know, we didn't necessarily all have the best, I guess, working habits. So long hours was common, working through breaks. But the pandemic did, I suppose, exacerbate that for a lot of people. Great to come up bigger, because perhaps 2 people have said that. So it's larger. Good, tired. So it is very variable. Busy. Yes, busy. I'm hearing a lot, and a lot more actually come in September. And I was mentioning this to you, Holly, wasn't I, just earlier, that you know, things felt quite slow for people coming out of the lockdown, but then actually suddenly you know, the pace is kind of ramped up, and we're doing more socially, work-wise. Our brains, I suppose, have to kind of readjust to that, because we got used to doing things in quite a different way. So our tolerance levels have changed. We might be more hypersensitive to noise. You know, it seems like the roads are far, busier than they ever were. So all of these things are just going to take us a little bit of adjustment time, I think. So we've got solo, okay, and this highlights that, you know, at any one time we may not be in a good place, and that might be you yourself, it might be those around you. And for me, it really does just emphasize the need for us to be human, to show empathy to people around us, and look for those little warning signs that someone might not be quite themselves. There might be a change in whatever normal is for them, so that we do, you know, open that conversation and allow them space to talk. And as a company, you know, I suppose ensuring that there is that knowledge within the business, and there are places for people to go. And actually your wellbeing strategy is where you would be looking at planning that, so that it's not just totally reactive. If someone happens to say something, It's actually, we do have a bit of a plan and a structure here for those who need it when they're struggling, and to keep those well who might be in a good place. So a bit of frustration there. So yeah, bit of a mix. I'm going to move this on to the next question now. I'm hoping this works. So it should pop up now for you to answer. Do you have a wellbeing strategy in place? So this is just to sort of gauge where we're at, really. And it's usually a bit of a mix. So I'll just wait for those to come in. And you have got the option of saying unsure if you're not sure what a wellbeing strategy is. So we've got a no, but it's on our to-do list. Brilliant. You're not alone in that. Yes, we are ahead of the game. Love it. Yes, but it needs some work. Okay. And it is a work, it's sort of a living document as well. So like any strategy, you know, things change. God, we know the last 18 months, you'd have to constantly review it. And so, you know, even if it is in place, it does need to be adapted to the current climate. So this makes sense. So we've got, you know, a lot of people who started on that journey or are soon to, hopefully, and unsure what is a wellbeing strategy. Well, I'm hoping I'll be able to answer that question for you today. I think just important to draw attention to the fact that we do have a workshop coming up later this year, a half-day virtual workshop that helps you to actually work towards a framework for that strategy. So it won't write it for you, but it gets you, you know, thinking about all the elements you need. So it's worth doing that if this is kind of on your agenda, but you haven't started yet. Okay, so we've got a bit of a mix, so that's useful to know where we're at. Okay. So the business case behind, I suppose, supporting wellbeing generally. And I think it's useful to say here that, you know, wellbeing strategy is something that before the pandemic, it just wasn't a term that was used that much. So if you were ahead of the game before that, then fantastic. We've been talking to companies for a long time to encourage them to plan a little bit more around what wellbeing means to them, how it's going to impact their people. But actually a lot of stuff that was done was very reactive, and it was very, you know, one-off, if you like. But the business case definitely is important if you're looking to put something in place, and you do need to get that engagement. So we do what we do from a moral point of view because it is the right thing to do to look after people. But, you know, a lot of the time it is also about looking at what is the bottom line for a company. So as I run through this infographic, I would just like you to maybe make some notes or have a think about what you're seeing specifically within your organisation. You know, is it positive? Is it negative? So I will share a paper actually probably at the end that goes into detail about some of the research that led to the statistics around this. But just to, I suppose, summarise it, if we do promote better mental well-being, we know that it reduces absence. And so, you know, how have your absence levels been through the pandemic? Actually, something some of our clients have seen is that they've dropped for those who are or could work from home, because people don't call in sick if they're not well, they don't have to travel. You know, maybe it reduces some of the barriers that are there if you're not feeling great or if you're anxious. People working from home with colds, whereas normally they'd have had to call in. So, you know, the fact that it's gone down might not be a great thing if people aren't getting time to recover and recuperate and take that time off that they need. So just useful to kind of reflect on that. Promoting better mental health lowers staff turnover. So, you know, you get to retain those valued staff members. So, you know, how is your turnover at the moment? Again, actually, a lot of companies saw people reluctant to leave because of the fear of, well, we knew there was the issues with unemployment. So I think, you know, that might be changing now, and you might see more people leaving because they've reflected through this time, they've realised what they want from work or life. It increases employee engagement. We want people to want to be at work. and it increases productivity. Something that's actually come up as more of an issue than absence is presenteeism, which some of you may be aware of, is where someone's in work, or they're in body but not in mind. So they are working when they're not well, physically or mentally, and that is going to have an impact on their productivity and their performance. Or it's going to mean they're working longer hours perhaps to get everything done, working through breaks, working at weekends, which might not be obvious, but over time, is that sustainable really for people? So ultimately, it's gonna save the company money. It's gonna be good for your brand, but actually, it's gonna keep people happy and healthy, and that's what we want. You know, we want people who are engaged and who are, you know, doing their best work really, and being as productive as they can be. So this is UK based, but I think it's a really useful document if you haven't seen it. So the Thriving at Work report was put together by Stevenson and Farmer, and Farmer is the lead of Mind, the mental health charity. And they put together these 6 core standards that every company should really be demonstrating and being very transparent about. But this was just before all the Brexit stuff sort of started, and then we've had a pandemic, and so this went to government, but nothing happened as quickly as they would have hoped. There are still conversations around it, and there's been quite a lot of discussion around whether it should become a law for every workplace to have a mental health first aider. Now, we deliver that training, and I think it can be fantastic, but I don't know whether that's the answer for every workplace. But it's good in that these conversations are happening. So definitely take a look at this. You can get it online, because it can be quite a useful benchmarking exercise to look at where you are currently in each of those 6 areas and where you might be able to improve. And it has some ideas and tips in there. So thought it was worth mentioning for that. And I just think watch this space, you know, in terms of not only the risk of, you know, stress and the risk of mental health at work, but just generally, because we're raising more awareness now, I do think that there's going to become more around the law to put in place support. I know that even some of the, and you'll know a lot more than me, I'm sure, working in the fields that you do, I know that there are certain ISO standards that do mention stress and the environment. So it's something that is starting to actually trickle out and become, you know, far more important than it perhaps used to be. So the Deloitte study, and this is probably the most, or the largest scale bit of research that was done into the return on investment of mental health initiatives really. So just show these stats here. So overall, they found that mental health costs UK businesses around £45 billion each year, which is huge. And that is mainly made up of presenteeism, as I mentioned before, so people in work but not being productive due to ill health. So that's around 30 billion, and turnover and absence make up the other. So huge costs to employers. And their initial Deloitte study was back in 2017, but they did a bit of an update just before the pandemic, and it would be very interesting to see those results. Now we've, you know, been through this last 18 months, but they haven't actually published any yet. But they found that, you know, there were these ongoing mental health issues, but there was a disproportionate rise for young people in the workplace. And we do know through the Office of National Statistics that has got worse in the pandemic and got worse for most minority groups. Presenteeism and leaveism are increasing. So leaveism, where people don't take their annual leave. And, you know, during the pandemic, a lot of people didn't because they couldn't go away. So they didn't want to just be in the house, might as well work. But, you know, it's not giving us the rest that we need. So is that actually going to help us long term, or could it result in burnout? And the increase of short-term contracts creates that uncertainty and offers less support. So it was impacting on people's mental health even more. And this was what employers said. So 40% of employers that had under 250 staff and 72% of employers with more than 250 staff reported a rise in mental ill health and stress. And it is the leading cause of absence now. So it's, again, you know, we could talk about the stats all day. I think we've got your buy-in because you're here, but it is important if you are putting that business case together to look at, you know, industry specific stats, and the Deloitte study does break that down, and to look at your specific organisation actually, and if you've captured any data, then that's really useful for pulling all that together. So this is a summary of what they found regarding return on investment and reactive support. So this would be things like employee assistance programs that offer 24 hours advice and counselling, therapy. So the things where, you know, that individual who's become unwell or is struggling accesses that support. So that reactive support brought a 3-to-1 return on investment. But the more proactive things that were aimed at everybody and keeping people well as supporting those who weren't well brought a 5-to-1 return on investment. And it makes sense, doesn't it? It's more tailored, it is catching things early, it's you know, data led, so you know, doing wellbeing surveys and actually looking at what that tells us. What do people need? Where do we need to work on? And delivering things like line manager workshops on how to support the wellbeing of their teams, building resilience in people, and having a strategy that's in place that will minimise risks, because I think it's all well and good putting training in place, but actually if the source of most people's stress is a particular way of working, then it's not going to help longer term. And then the organisation-wide interventions that are usually for those larger companies. So they can have things like apps that monitor wellbeing on a daily basis, perhaps, and then they generate that live data that we can work with and feed into those initiatives. But generally, yeah, it shows that it is worth investing in, but it's doing what's right for your company. And again, this brings us back to the idea of having a wellbeing strategy. And in answer to that question, you know, what is a wellbeing strategy? It is a framework or a plan that sets out what your goal is as a company in supporting the wellbeing of your teams, what's going to be part of that, and how you're going to measure it. So like your overall business strategy, really, this should form part of it rather than being separate, so that when you're looking at your business goals, one thing that's going to help you get there is for people to be well. So it's sort of a part of your overall business strategy. So what goes wrong? And I think this sort of links in with that previous slide in terms of just perhaps putting in reactive support or things that are slightly disjointed. So this was from some research done by Mind Gym, an organisation in the UK, and they found that these 5 areas were commonly things that companies did with all the best intentions, perhaps, but actually it didn't have a long-term positive impact. So this culture of or thought that it's the individual's responsibility to cope is the first one. So all of that ownership is on an individual. It's not our responsibility as a company to support somebody. You know, I can't impact someone's mental health. We're not experts. Those sorts of mindsets. Coddling. So, you know, where an organisation actually caters to every request without addressing some of the problems that might exist around performance or absence or conduct. And actually, we know long term that's not going to help the individual, and it's not going to help the company. So there's that fear of maybe making something worse for somebody who's already struggling if we raise it. Toxic positivity. So I don't know if you've come across this term before, but where, you know, everything has to be positive. Let's not dwell on the negative. No, we don't want to go there. We've got to be, yeah, we've got to, I suppose, be happy all the time, and it's not realistic. And actually, for those who are struggling, it is really, really difficult then to access that support. And it's denying someone of their feelings. The once and done, or the tick box, is really common, and it's not always done as a tick box, but actually, right, there's an immediate need, we need to put this training in place, we do it, but actually there's no follow-up, or people don't know where it's come from, so there isn't as much engagement in it as you may have wanted. And perks and diversions, so having things in place that are really nice, but are they what your company need? So things like free fruit Fridays, yes, it's part of that. If it's part of your strategy, then I think fantastic. But if it's something that's been done because someone thought it up and we don't know whether people actually value it, then is it the best thing to do? So putting these things right. So rather than it being that individual's responsibility, it's about everybody being in it together. And I think what's really important in this, though, is that there isn't too much pressure put on managers here. So I think it is a joint responsibility from the organisation, the top down, from leaders to recognise what is within the remit of their role in supporting themselves and others, and also individuals to be able to actually take action if they are struggling, whether that's accessing support, making positive changes, self-care. So I think we all do play a part in this in terms of well-being, and part of your strategy can often be to actually involve everybody. So setting out what everybody's responsibilities are at all levels of your company, so that we all know, actually, I do need to be quite aware of myself and know how I'm feeling, and be aware of others around me and how they're feeling. Equally, for managers, it might be we need to have regular one-to-ones where we do actually ask about stress levels, well-being. So just setting that out at all levels is really, really important, I think. Adult to adult conversations, so having ongoing conversations that are informal, that are about that person and their circumstances, rather than it sort of becoming parent-child, we're telling you what to do, or we're overly nurturing you. It's, how are things going for you? How are you finding things? Is there anything we need to be aware of outside of work? And I think right now that's particularly important, isn't it? Because a lot of people are remote and we don't necessarily know what's going on actually that could be impacting day to day. Being emotionally agile, so we can talk about, challenging things where we're not managing, but we approach them in a mindful and empathetic way, and we work together to look at what we need to do, whether that's as a company or as an individual. And in terms of the training and support as part of your strategy, I think it needs to be about little and often, and technology has definitely given us more scope to do that. Rather than one-off training sessions that are one whole day, we can do things in bite-sized chunks. We can do reminders for people using technology. So those small-scale actions do tend to have a longer-term impact, because how much do we actually remember from a day's training session? We'll take out a few snippets that we could relate to in that moment, but actually, I suppose it's about that idea of not wanting to kind of overwater a plant all in one go, so it drowns, but actually nurturing it and giving it, drip feeding it that information. And then finally, developing a climate of well-being. So rather than having just yoga once a month or something, this is actually about really involving managers and leaders in how they can, how their behaviours might influence their environment, things that they can do that build that positivity, create openness, and generally make people feel that it's a good place to be, it's a good place to work. And we all play a part in that, definitely. So just thinking about some of those areas, I just wonder, and maybe this is a sort of question just to you to reflect on, how many of those you could relate to within your organisation, and whether it's just sort of flagged something up and made you think, oh, actually, do we need to join up some of those activities a bit more? I think for some of the larger companies, it's even more of a challenge because you might have different departments with their own budgets, that may well have different ideas of what they need, but just to make sure you're all talking to each other, you might be able to, you know, learn and share. So how can a wellbeing strategy help us? And I suppose we've touched on this throughout. It's, you know, just actually having a framework is helpful in itself, because, you know, when we're doing something on our own, especially something that's seen as it's quite complicated, the area of mental health and well-being. You know, there's a lot of information out there, but where do you start? So I think without a clear framework or process, you can get lost. You can forget why you're doing something, and also it can be quite hard to involve others and be clear on why you're doing what you're doing. So these 6 steps we tend to use with companies to help them implement a strategy. So we'd work through these 6 steps, not necessarily always in that order. The stages 3, 4, and 5 kind of come hand in hand and may well even start before your commitment to wellbeing. But it's something to follow. So no matter what framework you use, and there are others available online, you know, it's just important to stick to that. And I suppose, you know, the measuring part at the end of that, the 6, is really important. So when you set out and plan and launch your strategy, part of that does need to be, how will we measure the impact of what we're doing here? And some of that could just be through things like surveys, but it might be conversations between managers and employees. It could be uptake of classes, number of downloads on a resource. There's a number of things you could do, absence levels. So just, you know, really think about how you're going to measure the impact. And it could just be through observation of behaviours. But having this strategy in place, what they found through some research was that alone, as long as you communicate it to people, did actually boost people's engagement, because it shows that you take it seriously. So I would never ever sort of recommend saying we have a strategy, let's communicate it, and then ending it there. But actually just the act of sort of saying, right, this is something that we are really on board with. We recognise how challenging things have been recently, so we want to involve you in this. We don't have all the answers right now. We don't have a complete set plan, but we do have a starting point. We have where we want to get to, and that's really important. What's the vision of this strategy? So it could be that a simple one of, you know, people feel this is a great place to work, and that's what we're going to be measuring. For others, it might be more specifically about the services or products that you produce, and the fact it could be about customer service levels. So whatever it is, actually, what's the vision? But communicating that to your people and saying, we want to involve you in that because we want to hear how you are, what you need, and make it very relevant. That in itself can really help with engagement. So one thing we hear a lot from HR professionals is, we can't start anything yet because we haven't got the time or the budget to deliver on it, so we're going to wait 6 months. Completely understand that, depending on what you've got going on, and actually dealing with things like return to work, furloughs, it's been a nightmare. But there's no harm in saying, yes, things are very busy, there's a lot of organisational change, but we haven't forgotten your well-being. So actually, before we can put anything, you know, formal in place, we are doing X, Y, Z, or we're ensuring that there's somewhere for you to go and talk to people. And I think it's just still saying something is really, really important. So I just wanted to think a little bit about this. And when I first pulled this together, it was with the thinking that it would be more of a facilitated session. So wanting you to just reflect on this, really. What barriers do you face when it comes to supporting wellbeing at work? Because they can always be overcome, but often when there's lots of them, it can feel a little bit overwhelming. And from our perspective, what we found is it doesn't tend to be money or resource as such, or budget. It tends to be the time issue that I just touched upon there. So, you know, not feeling that you can do it justice, or actually just really not having the headspace to do it, and a lot of people are on their own doing it within an organisation. So I would say with that, you know, do start small, but also look at who can support you on it. So it doesn't have to be somebody at your level. It might be that within the company there are a number of individuals who are passionate about wellbeing. Maybe they could be trained to be a wellbeing champion, and they can help to communicate messages out, keep up to date with what's going on. For example, next Sunday is World Mental Health Day, 10th of October. So things like that, you know, is there anything that those individuals can help you with, so that you're not on your own? So almost building a wellbeing working group together and having regular meetings, and actually having that sort of team means that, you know, people who are struggling or think, do you know what we need in this workplace, they've got somewhere they could go with those suggestions as well. And you might just do that for 6 months, gather some information and some recommendations from people, and then look at what you're going to do with those. So time is a big barrier. Getting buy-in, I think, can be, you know, at all levels, and also getting buy-in from your people themselves. So, you know, quite often people do put really useful workshops on. It might be about anxiety, or it could be about nutrition and mental health, but nobody turns up. And I think a lot of this is communication, but you've also got to remember you're not going to be able to put something out there that everybody is fully engaged with, but it is knowing your workforce and your demographics and how to reach them. So for example, next week I'm delivering a session for quite a large company ahead of World Mental Health Day, and they said, we want this, the main things, we want it to be accessible to everybody. And they were going to deliver it at 10 a.m. and I just said, is that the best time? You know, you want your frontline workers, you want your office based, you want everyone to be coming to this. And they realised that that was probably one of the worst times because of it being some sort of crossover of shifts. And they said, actually, no one would probably come. And we'd be saying, everyone join this, and they wouldn't be able to. So it seems obvious, but I guess just understanding who your people are, you know, what are some of the cultural differences, gender, all sorts of things that you may need to tailor your approach to in order to get that engagement and start that conversation with people. And then what's currently working? You know, we focus a lot on where we need to develop and what's gone wrong, but actually, what are you already doing that you might not have actually put in place formally or written down, or just naturally in a working environment, that mean people feel, you know, valued, there's trust there. So what's working, and if people are feeling trust, if you do have survey results, why are they feeling that way? Is it manager behaviours? Is it sometimes you just get a vibe in an office or in a workplace, even remotely, but what is it? Can you delve a bit deeper? Because we want to keep doing these things that are working well and build on them, and why change things if they are working? So yeah, what are you doing well? And actually asking people that question, because you could make assumptions all day. One of the questions that is a question that we often ask for clients, and you know, so much stuff comes up, and it's sometimes very simple little things that a manager could easily stop doing because they didn't realize they were. One of the things that I think it was the CIPD did some research through the pandemic, and they found that for the companies that were kind of rated the best in their feedback, engagement levels actually increased through the pandemic because they made more effort to communicate with their staff, because they knew they needed to. For those who were remote and in work, they had to talk to them more, ask them how they were, had anything happened, any changes. So actually people really welcomed that. So for them, it's to keep doing that, because to suddenly stop that off just because some people are back in the office, they're probably then going to see a real dip in that engagement. So, you know, what's working and to keep it going. And then who are your most at risk groups? This will vary dependent on who you are, but are there individuals who are more isolated, for example, don't see their colleagues as much? Are there certain groups that are physically vulnerable, who I suppose that has been flagged up through the pandemic for a lot of companies? So yeah, who are those at risk groups? And actually, as we move more out of the pandemic and into whatever the new normal looks like, who might become at risk, and that, you know, I suppose not just physically, but in terms of their job as well. So just thinking about that, because, you know, being secure is huge for our well-being, whether that's physically, financially, or mentally. So incorporating support for those who are at risk into your well-being strategy is really, really important. And I suppose future planning, looking at what challenges might be coming up within your business, what changes, are there restructures happening, new IT systems, all of those sorts of things could well, I suppose, exacerbate any existing issues for people. So I've mentioned upcoming workshops briefly there. So 30th of November is the Developing an Effective Wellbeing Strategy workshop. And then in January, we've got one that's more around leaders embedding staff wellbeing. So some of those softer skills and the role of the leader or line manager. And if you do want any support outside of those workshops, then you can get in touch kind of directly. So I will stop sharing these now. I finished a little ahead of time, but I will open it up to questions.
Thank you, Lisa, for that. That was really informative. And just to follow up on the courses, I've added the links to the web pages for each course into the chat area as well, so people can click those if they want to have a look and find out some more. As a reminder, if you have got any questions, feel free to use the questions function to ask those to Lisa, and we'll take 5 or 10 minutes now to go through any questions that come through. In the meantime, I have a few for you. So the first is, where do you start if you have a diverse workforce with employees in many different countries or across different cultures?
Yeah, so it is an added challenge, isn't it? And I touched on it only briefly there. We've worked with quite a few companies with that are global, and I suppose technology has helped, because, and again, that engagement has gone up for lots of those companies because they've been able to actually involve everyone in meetings, in chats, in every event that they do. It's actually more inclusive. But I think it does come back to actually mapping out who your people are and what those demographics are, and really understanding everything from their age, their gender, culture, and the job roles, because one of our clients has such a range of job roles within the business, and they realized that throughout I think it was the first kind of 6 to 8 months of the pandemic, everything that we put in place to support was virtual. So it was a virtual workshop or a webinar or something, and yes, they could probably access a computer somewhere, but if they're out in the field or they're construction, or that they just were not cleaners, they had a range of staff, and a lot of them didn't have English as a first language as well. So it was about actually talking to those individuals about what they'd need. It seems very obvious, but where do they see concerns? And so for some of those, for example, the cleaners, they put together their own sort of WhatsApp chat that was optional. There they could sort of share things, and the leader would maybe share bits and bobs in that. For some of the construction workers, they got people to do toolbox talks at the start of the day, that were delivered by somebody who was a similar demographic to them, that they felt they would engage with a little bit more. But I suppose with bringing together, I think you can't try and do one size fits all. So if you've got a very different culture, I think you've got to have your level of your strategy that is best practice, that is, and that's your overall goal for every area, but how you achieve that has to be different, because you need people to engage in it, whether that is that it's delivered in a different language, whether it is that you've got a different platform for certain people to use, and appreciating that actually, you know, I could deliver a really, really chatty, open session in America about one topic. Somewhere else, people would not want to necessarily open up about that. So it might have to be more information giving. So I don't know whether that answers it really, but maybe more of a waffle.
No, it definitely answers it. And okay, the next one then, is there a danger of doing too much in the area of well-being and it being, I guess, a bit overkill?
Yes, I think it can be. I think, yeah, if information is just given non-stop, and is slightly disjointed, then people can disengage with it. Those who are quite passionate about it already may well think, you know, why are they getting this so wrong? Others might just think, oh, you know, there's other things going on, I don't just need to know about this. So again, it comes back to a strategy of doing things that are actually, I suppose, linked to something. So maybe every month there is some sort of communication, or it's not necessarily even communications, but it's fed through teams, and it becomes actually a way of being rather than we've got this support line, or, you know, this is a really useful article. It's actually more about behavior changes, because those sorts of things, they're subtle, aren't they? And I think they have the longer term impact, because they're the things that are going to help someone's well-being. So I think there is a danger of overkill, and yeah, I think it's probably better to have one working group that are aware of what they're communicating than lots of people sending things around that could even, yeah, could be misinterpreted.
Okay, and then the final one is, if an organisation has put on some initiatives but the staff don't get involved, how do they ensure they can get that engagement for the next set of initiatives they decide to run?
I think, you know, you've got to get the feedback from people, and it seems so obvious, but I've delivered things with companies before and said, you know, can we do feedback afterwards? And they said, no, we will, but they don't, or they leave it quite a long time and people don't even, you know, don't really remember what it was, and so you don't capture that feedback. And I suppose if people didn't engage at all and didn't attend, then I would say it's for, you know, managers to talk to their teams about what their thoughts were individually, probably, and whether there's anything else that they feel they would be interested in. I think just simple questions like, you know, any of the following topics of interest to you, anonymously, is useful. But I think, yeah, I suppose it's, again, it's knowing your team. So there's a manufacturing company that we've started working with, and they, yeah, we're doing a topic around men's mental health, because it's a mainly male environment. I will not be delivering that. There's a place for me delivering things, but actually they want to hear from a man, and that's completely understandable. If I went in there, they'd probably think, oh no, what's this pink and fluffy thing going to be? And you know, based on some of the managers' feedback of that. So it's, I suppose you've got to, if people don't engage, you've got to look at how it was delivered, who delivered it, and whether it was actually linked to what the issues are.
Okay, sounds good. We haven't got any other questions, so we shall leave it there for today. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us, Lisa. We're really excited to run the first course with you on the 30th of November. So yeah, as a reminder, I'll pop the links in the chat function for anyone who's interested in finding out more about those courses. Thank you to everyone else for joining us today as well. And that's all. As I mentioned, the recording will be on the YouTube channel either later on today or tomorrow, so you'll be able to catch up on any recap on in your own time. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your days. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.